Hello, my name is Charles Creasy. In this video, we'll be discussing the statistical testing method called t-test. Specifically, we'll discuss what a t-test is and get a general sense of what it relies on. We'll discuss independent and dependent t-tests, how to interpret t-tests when you encounter it in literature, and finally, we'll look at an example of how it appears in research. Let's get started. A t-test is a statistical measurement based on comparing the means of samples from different groups. Along with the means, you'll also need the sample size, which we convert to a value called degrees of freedom, and the sample variances, which is based on the standard deviations. Using those values, we calculate an observed value and then compare it to a value in a t-table, which is based on a normalized curve. There are two different ways to calculate a t-test value, and we make that determination of which kind of test to calculate based on the variables we're testing. Let's look at the first one. An independent t-test is used when the two groups do not have an influence over each other. Typically, this occurs in a this or that type of test. In an independent t-test, each participant is usually tested only one time. The equation for calculating an independent t-test is based on the mean of each group, the number of participants in each group, and the variance of each group. A dependent t-test is used when you're testing a relationship where the groups have an influence over each other. Often, this means that the same group is tested twice, once before an experiment and then again after the experiment, and the result is used to indicate if the action from the experiment had an effect. Calculating a value for a dependent t-test uses the sum of all of the changes from the first measurement to the second measurement, and then adjusts that value based on the degrees of freedom and the variances of the differences. Here's a quick check for your understanding. A researcher is interested in determining whether an exercise plan affects blood pressure for a group of individuals. They measure each individual's blood pressure at the beginning of the experiment. The participants then complete the exercise plan for 6 months. Afterwards, the researcher measures the participants' blood pressure again. Should the researcher use an independent or dependent t-test to measure the likelihood that the exercise program influences blood pressure? Pause the video and then press continue when you're ready for the answer. Did you say a dependent t-test? If you did, you're right. A dependent t-test is appropriate because the blood pressure of the participants is measured twice with the assumption that the exercise plan would have an effect on the participant's blood pressure. In research, you'll often see the analysis of a t-test written something like this: t sub 50 equals negative 0.14, p greater than 0.05. What does that even mean? The T indicates that a t-test was used instead of a z-test or an ANOVA F-score. The 50 indicates that there were 50 degrees of freedom in the experiment, which means there were 52 participants. The negative 0.14 indicates that a value of negative 0.14 was calculated from the experiment. Finally, the p is greater than 0.05 means that there was more than a 5% chance that the results of the experiment can be accounted for by random chance. This means that the null hypothesis from this experiment cannot be rejected. Now it's your turn. Look at the t-test results on the screen. Would you accept or reject the null hypothesis? Did you reject the null hypothesis? Good job! We can interpret this statement as meaning a sample of 27 participants resulted in an obtained value of 4.30. Which, after evaluating using a t-table or SPSS, we can determine that it is greater than the critical value, so we would reject the null hypothesis. Finally, here's an example from a research study where a t-test was used. Researchers Uyanik and Sevic surveyed teachers to determine their self-compassion, forgiveness, and psychological resilience. They tested each of these characteristics using a survey and then measured against multiple variables. For some of the measurements, like job title, education level, and birth order, a t-test was not possible because there were more than two groups. However, for the gender variable, they compared male and female educators and used an independent t-test to evaluate the results. The results of the test showed that for self-compassion and forgiveness surveys, male teachers had a significantly higher level of measured self-compassion and forgiveness than female teachers. For the resilience measurement, a significant difference was not found.